So, here we are, 6 months later. And of course, we have the usual character model updates. Zeb looks a little different. Sabine has changed her hair and it looks awesome. Ezra looks substantially different. Some good stuff all around. Hondo is here, he's good as usual. And Ezra is far more violent, but also more decisive, and using more techniques. But he's also kind of being a dick, and not really nice. And it's actually kind of irritating, because he comes across as, frankly, a teenager, and it's just kind of irritating. He's also very reckless. I wanted to quantify that, because there's a difference between I'm going to have the experience and skill necessary to know when I need to leap, versus I'm not even going to consider whether I should leap or not, I'm just going to leap. That's recklessness. It's not about rushing into things. It's about rushing into things without consideration. And that's exactly what he does here. And it really does cost him, and with good reason. This was very nearly a total rout for this rebel cell because of his recklessness. The worst part is, despite that, he doesn't even really apologize at the end. He says, I'm sorry, but it worked out. That's not an apology. That's not how that works. So he doesn't even learn anything from this, really. I have a feeling that'll be coming back in the future, which is good. It should be a character arc thing. In fact, honestly, I did like this episode. The only part I didn't like is the drama that happened between Ezra and Kanan. And when I say drama, in this case, it's a very specific flavor of it. Two characters refusing to really communicate with each other. They just automatically assume things, and they get super defensive, and they start yelling, and it's just blah, 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 blah. I hate it. Get away. A quick aside. Early on in the episode, there's this bit where this guy gets blasted by a vehicle cannon from an AT-ST, not ST, and he just goes, "Wah!" I don't think that's what's supposed to happen. I don't think it's like a push. I think it's more of a... Anyways. So Ezra, of course, is very frustrated and very angry, mostly at himself, which naturally awakens the holocron and leads him to start listening to it more. I wonder where they were going with the fact that they chose the actress for Ventress to play the holocron. I have read that was a deliberate hook. That was something they weren't just doing casually, but they did it on purpose. But from what I've read, and please feel free to correct me on this, they never actually followed through on that, so I don't actually know what that was intended to mean. If I was to speculate, it would be on the obvious, that she found it and she recorded some of her stuff in a holocron, but at the same time, even that doesn't quite make sense, given what we know of Ventress's, finale and exodus out of the Clone Wars. I don't know. So then we see Governor Price for the first time. She's been referenced since Season 1, but now she's finally on camera, and she's incredibly evil. Actually, we don't know that yet, but we'll get more into her later. She doesn't really have much here. I do like the bit where she says that Constantine, Admiral Constantine, is a politician, not a soldier, because she is a politician. In many ways. If you read about her backstory or in the comics and whatnot, she is a hell of a political manipulator. In fact, that's the entire reason she drew Thrawn into this. Mostly because he was an ally of hers, a political ally. Not for any other, substantial reasons. I mean, he's talented, of course, and she believes in him, but you get my point. So then we have the Y-Wings, which are a good ship, and I would never say elsewise. One of the things I like about this is, once again, Kanan goes back to the Force because he has no idea what to do. As I've mentioned several times, blind trust in the Force, no pun intended, has kind of always been his thing, because it's all he's really had. And funnily enough, here it leads him to the Bendu. And we gotta talk about the Bendu. But I don't really feel like there's much to talk about, at least not yet. He mentions that he's kind of in the middle, which is something that a lot of people were excited about, including me, when this season first came out. I remember the show was already going at this point, and several people asked me what I thought about this. And my thoughts remain firm. I think this is a good idea. I also like his approach to things. It is actually very Yoda, post-humble Yoda, the Empire Strikes Back Yoda. And it works, I think. Because, well, all he does is really shine a light on things that other people already know and simply don't want to acknowledge. He doesn't tell you. He helps you to discover. And there is a distinction there. I also like how he leaves the Sith holocron with him. I'm sure that won't come back in the future. There's one piece I don't like about that encounter, And that's that Kanan says, "Oh, I've been filled with, grief and anger and fear, and that's how I see myself." Unless he's been seeing himself like that for 15 years, which is possible, I feel like this is a bit of a misstep. It feels a little bit like it comes out of nowhere, because it feels like this is what he's been feeling for 6 months. They mentioned several times that he's been just kind of off on his own. He hasn't been going on missions. He's been very isolated and going through a lot of stuff. So the idea is that during that time, this has been his mentality, but that's not on camera, and as a consequence of not being on camera, it doesn't really work as well, I don't think. It's like his arc concludes, but we never saw the arc, we just saw the conclusion. Anyways. I could talk about the mission itself. I could talk about how Ezra was actually kind of awesome when talking to the Admiral dude. The former Admiral, excuse me, the commander. The guy on the station. Like, it's you? Yeah. Yeah, okay. You probably want to start going. But I have to talk about Thrawn. Thrawn has been a fan-favorite character for many, many years. I have seen several lists and votes and polls, and of course I've discussed this with friends and with viewers for many years. Usually there are two characters who tend to gravitate towards the top of the list of, three characters, who tend to gravitate towards the top of the list of fan-favorite characters who are not from the original trilogy. Thrawn, Mara Jade, and Revan. So them bringing Thrawn back in was in many ways a huge PR move, and I discussed this at the time, again, at length. What I find most interesting is I have since discovered, looking a little bit into this show and its construction, that the intention was always to bring Thrawn in. This was always a way to establish him in the AU. He was supposed to be back in Season 1. They decided not to because they thought that Thrawn was too large-scale of a threat, and they wanted things to stay small-scale. Now, if you've been paying attention to my Mini-Nations here, that's exactly what I was saying, that Season 1 and 2 were small-scale, and should be. With the now formal introduction of Thrawn and Governor Pryce, and the fact that they're trying to actively build a large-scale rebel network, well, now we've gotten large-scale, so now's the good time to introduce him. I don't know if I like his voice actor yet. I'm going to have to hear him more. And he had almost no screen time in this episode. He showed up for 2 extremely brief scenes. However, both of those scenes do establish that this is at least some variant on Thrawn, that he's a long-term thinker, and that he has a plan in mind that doesn't involve immediate gains. In other words, he lets them go specifically because he is trying to stop the widespread nature of a greater galactic rebellion, not trying to capture one group of one rebel cell. Now, this is funny in its own right, because his doing so is one of the only reasons Ezra and crew actually managed to get out of this. But you can see why people are like, huh. I also want to comment that I don't like the eyes. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I don't like how they do the eyes, the Chiss eyes. But I've heard some people accuse that the only reason they brought back Thrawn was for pandering. Like, here, look, here's a character you like. I don't think that's true. I may have said that in the past. I don't actually recall. Obviously, bringing him back for PR reasons is a great move. They announced the hell out of it. There was tons of marketing about the return of Thrawn. So I don't begrudge them that, but I don't think from a creative perspective that's why they brought him back. I think, and I have thought for several years, that the approach to the AU has been cherry-picking elements from the EU and carrying them forward into the AU in a more codified fashion. And cherry-picking Thrawn was a natural move. He is a great puzzle piece that fits very smoothly and neatly into the narrative of Star Wars as a whole, ignoring the fact that he's a popular character who's well-liked, and is written by the ever-awesome Timothy Zahn, who is one of my favorite authors of the modern era. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And again, remember, the people working on this show are fans. They love the idea of bringing this stuff forward. I've already talked about that with the Malachor thing, and there was another thing. I don't remember. There's been several references. The Hammerhead ship. There's been several references they keep bringing to older stuff because they're fans, because they want to bring that stuff forward. And it's worth noting they didn't just bring Thrawn back as a gimmick. He will be one of the major characters for the rest of the show. I know this. He will not leave the show till the end of Season 4, the finale. And they actually brought Timothy Zahn on to help write for him and to consult. So they put their work into this. And for that, that's awesome. So we have an interesting, bit of a flawed, but nevertheless a strong start for Season 3. I'm looking forward to seeing where we're going with this.